spokesperson on education, Dr. Rebecca Torteo, education. Can everyone hear me? This is an audio test. 1, 2, 3. Dr. Rebecca Torteo, education specialist, UNICEF Jamaica. Dr. Faryal Khan, program specialist for education, UNESCO Cluster Office. Dr. Lauret Bristol, program manager, human resource development, CARICOM Secretariat. Mr. Sean Powers, economist, education global practice, World Bank. Mrs. Vivienne Johnson, senior director, planning development division in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. Heads of agencies, departments, and units of the ministry, and other staff of the ministry, school leaders, teachers, and other staff, parents, students, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all, thank you so very much for joining us across all platforms. Good afternoon and welcome to the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information's Planning to Operations webinar under the theme, Managing the Jamaican Education Landscape during the COVID-19 pandemic, from planning to implementation. I am Dr. Terry Carell-Reid. I am pleased to serve you in the capacity of moderator for this afternoon, but I'm also the parent. I'm the parent of an 8-year-old daughter, and I'm almost positive that the questions and the concerns that I might have might mirror, echo, or align with the questions that you have. But the ministry understands all of these concerns and thought that this webinar was extremely important for us to have this live discussion. We understand that some of you parents have been speaking in your private groups, your WhatsApp groups, in PTAs, and also in the public sphere. But we guarantee you that we've had an amazing team here working assiduously. We have international partners who are going to present to add insight and, of course, to enlighten us where back to school is concerned. As a matter of housekeeping, all the questions that you have, regardless of the platform you might be tuning in from, please go ahead and make your questions known and your concerns. There are no stupid questions, and if it's valid to you, it is valid to us. If there's any parent you may know who may not be aware of this, please go ahead and share the link. The hashtag is MOEYI Back to School Plan so that you can be a part of the ongoing presentation and conversation. Again, thank you so very much for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And to really start it out, as is customary, we will ask for there to be prayer. I invite Dr. Damian Black, Commissioner of the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, JTEC, to kindly move our prayer. Do you want me to use a mic?
Good afternoon, everyone. Let us pray. Eternal, gracious, and loving God, we thank you for your continued grace and favor. We thank you for this day and all that has happened so far. God, we pray that you would give every leader strength so that they do not grow weary in their leadership role. At this time, we thank you for Minister Carl Samuda and the leaders of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. Thank you for other leaders assembled in this webinar. We acknowledge the critical environment in which all of us as policymakers, leaders, administrators, students, and practitioners operate in light of the impact of COVID-19. Thank you for the responses to date. This is all new to each one of us. Templates are being written even as we speak. So as we assemble in this webinar to receive policy statements, various program responses, to receive updates and reports, we invite your presence, your wisdom, and your peace. We acknowledge the work of the moderators, the technology support team, the communications and information professionals, and we ask that their planning and preparation will see great success. God, the tasks may seem overwhelming and exhausting, but I pray that every leader will recognize that they are assigned to do and empowered to achieve. Therefore, I pray for continued commitment and focus by all. We know that the education systems in Jamaica and throughout the Caribbean will benefit from the reflections this afternoon. At the right time, we will reap the harvest and rewards commensurate with the work invested. God, I pray for divine strength for every leader and that they will not rely on themselves, but on you. We give you thanks and we invite your presence. Be with us all. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so very much, Dr. Damian Black. Beautiful words there. We are empowered to achieve, and he prayed for divine strength to our leaders. And again, we do echo the sentiments that we thank each and every person who has been a part of the committee, learning still, changing things, collecting data, using the data, exchanging with other persons who have the expertise for us to strategize, to make policy, and of course, to implement, which is why we are here. Without further ado, I welcome Dr. Grace McLean, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, to give us the welcome and opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. The Honorable Carl Samudo, Minister of Education, Youth and Information, Honorable Orlando Terrelong, Minister of State, Mr. Peter Bunting, Opposition Spokesman on Education, Dr. Kessan Troop, Chief Education Officer, Mrs. Vivian Johnson, Senior Director, Planning and Development within the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, our international partners, school leaders, teachers, parents, and students, our esteemed guests, ministry staff, and other viewers, good afternoon, and a very special welcome to you all. We are pleased to have you participating in our first virtual seminar of this nature, centered on the theme, Managing the Jamaican Education Landscape During the COVID-19 Pandemic, from Planning to Implementation. The education sector has been significantly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. While secondary schools were partially reopened to facilitate preparation for exit examinations in June, we recognized that there are still concerns regarding the full reopening of schools for the new academic year 2021. Against this background, ladies and gentlemen, the ministry felt it important to be proactive in its arrangements to safeguard the lives of all our education stakeholders as we prepare the system for this new normal for education services delivery. In keeping with this new normal, we have decided to use this platform to inform stakeholders of the initiatives, policies, and protocols that have been put in place to safeguard the system during this pandemic and, by extension, future emergencies that may arise. We recognize that we must be able to coexist with the coronavirus, and we will do everything to ensure the safety of our students, teachers, administrators, and all persons who keep the wheels of the education system turning. We are aware that our stakeholders are anxious to hear more about the established measures for the safe reopening of schools. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is just one of the ways that we will continue to sensitize our nation. The groundwork has been completed, but we are still learning day by day. Data has been collected locally and internationally, and this we have used to inform the response to the pandemic. We have developed our Education in Emergencies Manual, which was circulated to all schools. So rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, that all public and private institutions across the island are being prepared to effectively cope amidst this crisis. I wish to commend and thank our international partners who have contributed significantly to our advancement in education, and for this we are truly appreciative of your consistent investment. And when we speak about international partners, we are talking about partners such as the World Bank, the IADB, UNICEF, UNESCO, the CARICOM Secretariat, and the many others who continue to support us. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Terry Carell Reid, an active stakeholder in education, demonstrated by her work as a UNICEF ambassador for education, as well as her general outlook on key matters concerning the sector, will be the anchor for this very important session. Dr. Terry, we are really pleased to have you in the Ministry of Education's boardroom.
Thank you.
To all Jamaicans here and in the diaspora, we are grateful for the confidence you continue to place in this ministry for the well-being of our children. Be assured that we take nothing for granted with respect to the future of this country, as we know that education is the underpinning base for the success of our country. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us from wherever you are in Jamaica and in the diaspora, as well as the entire world for that matter. We anticipate your participation via our social media platforms, and we look forward to engaging all of you for the benefit of Jamaica, land we love.
Thank you so very much. That was Dr. Grace McLean, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, certainly giving us some confidence. I do understand that some of us as parents, we've been speaking to other parents from different schools, and whether it is primary schools or whether it is public schools or private schools, it really doesn't matter. I think we do have to stick together. It is also very important that we're using other international partners to learn as we go along, and we have to remind each other that we're in it together. So as one learns something, it's each one, teach one, and so forth. So again, I'm going to remind you, if you know anyone or there any parent out there who may need to benefit from this particular discussion and may not know about it, please share the link, and of course stay tuned to the ministry's pages across all platforms where they will continue to have an ongoing conversation. Now, it was mentioned many times in our protocol and even in our opening and our welcome that we have very important international partners who are helping to exchange the information so that we can come up with our policies as well as our initiatives. Our very first presenter for this afternoon is Mr. Sean Powers, educational economist, World Bank. And his presentation will be dealing with the COVID-19 crisis in education, how to prevent learning and economic losses. And for those of you who may just need to know just a little bit more about him, he is an economist in the education global practice of the World Bank, and he has led operations and analytical work in the Caribbean, Central America, and West Africa, and has worked at all levels of education from early childhood development to higher education. So during this presentation, Mr. Powers will share the World Bank's estimates of the potential long-term effects of COVID-19 on student learning, future earnings, and economic activity, both in Jamaica, which is relevant to us, as well as globally. He will then share approaches to preventing learning losses from the World Bank's global experience and research, and address the role of skills development in helping individuals and economies to rebuild after the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Mr. Sean Powers, our very first presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar this afternoon and for having me. If you'll allow me just one moment, I will share my screen and hopefully you'll all be able to see my slides. Okay, so my name is Sean Powers. I'm an economist with the World Bank, and I have been working with the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, the Early Childhood Commission, and other partners in Jamaica for the last 4 years on various education-related projects. And very happy to be continuing that relationship as we work together to confront the challenges of COVID-19. My presentation will be discussing the potential learning losses and consequent economic losses from this pandemic, and some of the ways that we can think about from global evidence and global best practice to prevent those losses. Some of you may have seen me present at an earlier webinar with the University of the West Indies. There's some overlap in material, but I'm also going to be presenting some new estimates on learning losses and economic losses from my colleagues at the World Bank. And I included a link on this page, and there'll be another link later. I encourage you to look at the World Bank's Education and COVID page for a compilation of these and other resources. So even before COVID hit, we had a serious challenge in Jamaica and around the world in terms of education. We were already in a global learning crisis with too few children going through school and not mastering the basic competencies that they need to succeed in the labor market and to become well-rounded citizens. And we were already off track to reach the Sustainable Development Goals for education. And within those top line numbers on learning, we were also facing extreme inequalities of opportunity along lines of socioeconomic status, race and ethnicity, gender, disability, and many other factors that affect the opportunities that children have to get a quality education. One measure that the World Bank has developed to assess the gaps in quality of education under our Human Capital Index is to look at the difference between actual years of schooling and what we call learning adjusted years of schooling. So essentially the difference is, you know, a child may go to school for a year, but what she learns may be only half a year or 3/4 of a year worth of learning when we benchmark against what children can learn from the top performing education systems in the world, such as Finland and Singapore. And in the case of Jamaica, the gap between the actual years of schooling and learning adjusted years of schooling is about 4.5 years, which gives an indication of the unmet potential due to quality issues in education. And this is likely to only become worse in the context of COVID-19. So there's some new work from my colleagues at the World Bank simulating the likely learning losses from the pandemic. The reason these are simulations is because this is a totally unprecedented situation. We have never seen anything like this before, and it's quite hard to predict what the impacts will be. But we can look at the global literature on previous interruptions in education to get a sense of what we might be in for if we don't act swiftly and decisively. So these simulations are based on different assumptions, which can be varied on how long schools close. 3 months, 5 months, 7 months, or longer, and the effectiveness of different mitigation efforts, such as distance learning, which in turn depends on what kind of access households have to information and communication technology, as well as the quality of the distance education itself. And using that, we've developed 3 scenarios: an optimistic, intermediate, and a pessimistic scenario. Now, if we take just the middle scenario, we can expect that in the absence of strong mitigation efforts, a loss of about half of a learning adjusted year of schooling for children in Jamaica as a direct result of COVID-19. And that's both from the lost opportunities in the classroom, the lower quality of distance education relative to in-person education, and also potentially an increase in dropouts. And you can see the range on this slide. The optimistic scenario would be only 0.2 years, and the pessimistic scenario would be almost a full learning adjusted year of school. And these learning losses in turn translate to losses both individually and at the level of a country in terms of economic prosperity and output. There's a lot of evidence linking both individual earnings and economy-wide performance to not only the amount of schooling that citizens acquire, but also the quality of that schooling as measured by internationally comparable assessments. So in the case of Jamaica, again, this is without mitigation efforts. These learning losses related to COVID-19 would be expected to reduce annual earnings in the future by an average of over 71,000 Jamaican dollars. That's about 480 US dollars. If we aggregate across the world, across all countries, it's quite a staggering number. It's 10 trillion US dollars. So to put that in perspective, that would be like Germany and Japan, which are the third and fourth largest economies in the world, having no output for an entire year. That's how much damage we could potentially see if we don't take decisive actions. So what should we actually do? I think the goal of any mitigation efforts should be to build a better and more inclusive system. And that's what some of my fellow panelists will also talk about today. And to take some of this increased attention to health and safety, practical professional development for teachers, curriculum, and learning gaps, and carry those forward into the continuity phase and the COVID recovery phase. And I'm only going to touch on a few examples. Again, if you would like more complete treatment of this, I recommend checking out the World Bank's Education and COVID page. So if you were to take only one thing away from my presentation, it would be this. It's the importance of teaching at the right level. In almost every education system in the world, one of the biggest problems is that the curriculum moves too fast for many students and leaves them behind. They don't acquire the fundamental literacy and numeracy skills in such a way that they can sustain their learning, remain in school, and continue to benefit from higher levels of learning. So it's of the utmost importance in recovery efforts that we meet students where they are in terms of learning, because we know that if children don't acquire those skills in a timely fashion, then the losses just accumulate because they aren't able to build on those fundamental skills as they move forward in the education system. So as we return to school, whether it's in a hybrid model or a full return, or perhaps even continued virtual learning in the new year, it's critical that we not immediately impose the business as usual expectations from the curriculum on students, that we have a catch-up period that could be as long as a year or even longer than that to allow students to recover from the missed opportunities that they've had during the pandemic. An equally important ingredient in that is using formative assessment to assess where exactly students are. And so the teachers at the classroom level, but also ministries at the national level can calibrate learning accordingly to where students actually are. And importantly, teachers also need guidance. Teachers need to get a strong sense of what they should be prioritizing and what they can deprioritize in the event that they have reduced instructional hours during the year. And the things that they prioritize should very much focus on these foundational skills that are critical as students move from one level of education to the next. It's also important to note that in the context of COVID, the children who are likely to suffer the most are in early childhood education, given the difficulty that they have due to their level of development in substituting online learning for in-person learning. So it's particularly critical to sustain and enhance our support for early childhood institutions. Second, looking toward the long term and thinking about how to stem those economic losses, it's quite important that we have skills offerings not only at the secondary level, but tertiary level and TVET that are adaptive to the changing world economy. And so it's, we can't predict exactly what the future is going to look like, which is why it's important that we create systems that are adaptive, that use labor market information, both from Jamaica, but also from the region and internationally. And that training includes a set of cross-cutting skills, including so-called soft skills, so interpersonal skills, teamwork, communication, which we know from employers in the region are not always present in the workforce as they seek candidates to fill their positions. It's also extremely important to build partnerships with employers, be they private sector or public sector, to include a very strong component of on-the-job training. The evidence suggests that at least 50% of learning should be hands-on and on the job to maximize the benefit of these skills programs. And finally, to the extent that we learn and test new approaches during the COVID era, this is an opportunity again to build back better and to scale up and sustain the approaches that worked. So, there are some who say that, this may be the beginning of a new era of purely virtual education. I, for one, think that there's still a great deal of value in the in-person interaction and that that's not going to go away. But we can think of technology as a supplement to in-person teaching, particularly as a way for students to do more of that self-paced learning. So that's something we can take, I think, from this era and carry forward. In many countries, including in Central America, there are new early warning systems using education management information systems to identify students who are at risk of dropping out and give them the kinds of supports that they need to stay in school. For teaching at the right level, there are many models that are potentially of interest. One that Jamaica might want to consider is using young people who may be looking for employment opportunities, may be interested in becoming teachers in the future, to be tutors, to help the children who have fallen behind to catch up. And it's also a great way to identify those who have a flair and a skill for teaching to become your future teaching workforce. And finally, we've seen in the context of this crisis, the importance of socio-emotional support. Parents, teachers, students, many of them are going to need some additional support coping with what's happened, coping with potentially elevated risks of violence and abuse, and just the general stress level that many of us are experiencing now due to the health and economic crises. Those are things that we can carry forward and ensure that they don't become barriers to children's learning and young people's training in the future. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much again for having me, and I look forward to the other panelists and to the discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much, Mr. Sean Powers, Economist, Education Global Practice of the World Bank. I couldn't help but really listen to what he was saying, and I don't think it's just for the educational system, but also for us parents. Since it's going to be post-COVID, we shouldn't necessarily expect all of our children to go out of the gates running very well. We have to give everybody time. We have to give the teachers time to adjust, and we certainly have to give our children some time to adjust. He brought up some very, very good points in terms of having formative assessments and really looking at children who may be falling behind and who may not be coping a lot. So again, I think it's not just for the Ministry of Education necessarily, but for all of us as an ecosystem to see how it is we can help each other to prevent the learning losses as well as the economic losses. So again, thank you so very much, Mr. Sean Powers. We will now be joined, if I'm not okay, we'll now be joined by Mr. Peter Bunting, MP, opposition spokesperson on education. And the topic is dealing with the COVID-19 crisis in education, empowering stakeholders to manage the return to schools. Welcome, Mr. Bunting.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Let me just start by saying I'm happy to be here. As you can imagine, I had accepted this invitation before a certain announcement was made. So I'm in my constituency, very, very busy at this time. But I always try and make time for the education sector because of its critical importance. I have, since taking over this portfolio last October, I've consistently spoken to the need to empower school leadership to manage and innovate at the local level. My own view is that the Ministry of Education is a hopelessly over-centralized bureaucracy. At the Public Accounts Committee, for example, we went through Auditor General's report, or an Auditor General's report, which spoke to some schools having storerooms of textbooks which were sent to them by the central ministry and which they didn't need. At the same time, other schools had little or no supplies of this very same textbook. So we had in the system some parts oversupplied, some schools oversupplied, their storerooms overflowing, and others that just never got their appropriate allocation of textbooks to begin with. And my own feeling is that this system would work much better if we devolve the budgeting process to the school level. School boards and school principals would get their entire allocation of budget. Nothing would be centralized at the parent ministry at Heroes Circle or at the regional level, but all the budgets, the financial resources and the human resources to an extent should be pushed down to the lowest level at which it can be, at which a task can be competently carried out. So for example, we see the Ministry of Education through e-learning has for the last 4.5 years bungled the acquisition of 40,000 tablets for students. 4.5 years later, they still haven't managed to get that right. They haven't distributed one single tablet to a student. They just started distributing tablets to teachers last month. Now, if that budget had been sent directly to the school with the specifications for the tablets, within a month, that would have been accomplished. It would never have taken 4.5 years. And the interesting thing is that schools that are more advanced, for example, could have put that towards purchasing laptops, which would have been much more appropriate than these tablets. Schools could have adopted a complete integrated learning management system if they were ready and at that stage. And then the most advanced schools in a region or in a constituency or in a parish could essentially become models for best practice of adopting technology or whatever the latest teaching and learning innovations are. And finally, I would say when it comes to preparing for the safe return to school in September, the idea of empowering school leadership, school boards, school principals, teachers and administrators with as much resources and as much discretion as possible, as much information as possible also coming from the Ministry of Health. I think that would allow the appropriate modality to be adopted. Whether it's phased and blended would depend on the density of the current school population. So in my own constituency of Central Manchester, I have Richmond Primary School, which has a capacity for 400 plus kids. It only has 120 enrolled. There is no reason why they have to have any delay in the restart of school. They have more than enough space to accomplish social distancing within the existing infrastructure. So instead of having another month wasted and to exacerbate the learning loss that the previous speakers referred to, we could have them with a quick start and trying to get back to normality as soon as possible. On the other hand, Manchester Primary or Mandeville Primary or Manchester High School both have near 2,000 students. They are, bursting at the seams. They're in the middle of the, a much denser town center, a municipality. So they would have to adapt a more rigid, a more cautious approach to restarting. There's no way that a central ministry or even a region can develop the appropriate set of modalities that will apply, that will be sufficiently customized for the 900 and odd primary and secondary schools that we have in the public system, not to mention the hundreds of basic schools. So with that, let me pause. Let me also apologize for not being able to join you before this time. One of the challenges of being out in my constituency, particularly the rural parts of it in Belfield and Knockpatrick, is that we don't have good internet access at all. So until I could return to Mandeville, I didn't have a reliable connection to join you at 3 as I had originally hoped. So I apologize for that, but I think I would use my own experience to illustrate some of the challenges that my constituents, that the children in my constituents and their parents have in this so-called remote learning. It actually does not happen for the vast majority of rural children. What they are able to achieve is not at all acceptable levels of teaching and learning on when they were attempting to do that remotely.
All right. Thank you so very much. Thank you for your kind contribution. I believe I can say this on behalf of everyone here. Apology definitely accepted. We do understand, but we thank you for bringing your remarks. Speaking there about the importance of empowering school leadership, the boards, the administrators, everyone who has a hand in ensuring that our children return to school safely. He also mentioned about, managing and innovating at the very local level. Spoke about also working along with the Ministry of Health, which is definitely expected, so that the different initiatives and policies that are being made will be made with all parties and entities involved. Thank you so very much again, Mr. Bunting, for your time.
Welcome.
We really do appreciate it. So we heard from Mr. Sean Powers earlier, who spoke about the economic losses, especially as it results from learning losses. And we're going to go to our next international partner, and that is Dr. Rebecca Torteo, education specialist, UNICEF Jamaica. And her topic is dealing with the COVID-19 crisis in education, the global perspective, building back better with hope, which I'm sure a lot of our parents are going to want to hear about. Dr. Torteo has regularly lectured at the University of the West Indies in the Department of Education for over 15 years and is the author of a number of articles on education. She has also worked with the Jamaican government as senior advisor/consultant to the Ministry of Education, directed the Spanish Jamaican Foundation, and served on numerous boards, including the Early Childhood Commission and the Jamaica Commission for UNESCO. During her presentation, Dr. Torteo will discuss the ways in which technology assists in maintaining social distancing, affords individualized instruction, and creates equal access to content. Dr. Rebecca Torteo, education specialist, UNICEF Jamaica, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Minister, Mr. Bunting, colleagues from other international development agencies. I hope you can hear me well. I'm going to try and share my screen and you will hopefully see it. Hopefully you're seeing that now. And so as you said, Terry Carell, the topic is building back better with hope. And I added in the hope because we all need hope in these uncertain times with this pandemic, as Sean noted, has caused us to take stock and really reflect on our systems, what's working, what's not working, how can we improve, what gaps can we close. And it's giving us an opportunity to hopefully build a more equitable and just system, and one that will be fit for all children. Certainly one of the first targets to do that will be finding ways to enable us to close the digital divide. So as Sean also referenced, we are in an education emergency. We were in one before. So if you look at these global figures, 1.6 billion children and youth had their education disrupted. 63 million teachers are trying to make sure that learning does not stop. And it has a $10 trillion potential impact of lost learning to the global economy. Sean shared some of these figures in terms of our own context. And while we recognize and applaud the resilience and the creativity that many of our 30,000 educators from early childhood right on up, and many of our parents have shown in this transition to schooling at home, schooling online, when our school buildings closed in mid-March, when school reopens, these partnerships between home, school, and community using technology will remain more critical than ever. We tried very hard in Jamaica to minimize these impacts that you see on the screen of a learning crisis deepening, of limited access for the most marginalized, and of the fact that this pandemic is more than a health crisis. It has put learning, well-being, and safety at risk. We tried very hard to share information using all forms of media any way we could to keep schooling going, using TV, radio, printed packets, even community blackboards, on painted walls on school grounds. We've handed out learning kits in partnership, UNICEF, in partnership with the Early Childhood Commission, Fight Food for the Poor, and the UE Department of Child Health. You've seen a lot of people coming together to try and help where they can, providing care packages. We've seen the government moving to act strategically to provide path support, and that will increase and continue as the school year begins. We know that we were able to reach 600,000 of our students in some way, shape, or form. What we do not know is whether we were able to reach them all every day for sustained periods on equal times. And Sean mentioned that. So what we have seen is we have had unequal provision, which will result in learning loss. And for a fact, we know we did not reach some 30,000 children. We ran a poll last month with the ministry using our U-Reporters. U-Report is a technology tool that's used all around the world. It's a UNICEF innovation. It's a social messaging tool and data collection system that is built on citizen participation. So it shares information and collects opinions. When we polled our 10,000 U-Reporters, those who responded told us that 45% of them told us that they were frustrated with distance learning, and 70% of them said they preferred going to school in person. Also, they told us that they were in regular contact, 80% of them, with their teachers, so that's positive, and that they were able to count on some level of parental support. When September arrives, we're going to have a slide compounded by a summer slide. A summer slide is a phenomenon that happens to all children in the summer. They regress, with lower income children regressing further than upper middle and upper income children. This will be compacted with the COVID slide. We know too that particularly our children with special needs, their daily routine in school has caused stress to their emotional health and mental health, and their lack of access to a main meal every day and stable adult role models. And so we've been working closely with the ministry to provide mechanisms for parents to stay in contact with professionals who can give them guidance as they take on their role as their children's first and most important teachers. As parents, we have newfound appreciation for teachers. All of these reasons, all of these impacts tell us that it's important to go back to school. And together with other development partners, we've crafted frameworks for reopening that explain why we should reopen, when, where, and how can we support the most at risk. The ministry's guidelines that have been disseminated have actually reflected much of the work in this framework. We know that a successful reopening process has to be specific to every country context, decided and agreed upon by the government, informed by evidence from the public health sector, and guided by the best interest and participation of the school community. This picture is from Uruguay, a country in our hemisphere with about a similar population, similar caseload of COVID. They closed in mid-March and they reopened in late June. You can see they're socially distanced, wearing masks. They started with early childhood first, and then they added on levels subsequently. Reopening, however, I want to note, is not a simple act. It's a process. So it's going to evolve, and that flexibility is critical because we have to find ways to maintain open lines of communication with clear messaging, monitoring of teaching and learning, and overall emotional and academic support to our teachers and parents. Here are a few slides now of results of school opening in over 90 countries, and you can see from the charts that 77% are implementing at least one measure to mitigate learning losses, and over 50% of countries have trained teachers on remote and blended learning. Jamaica is doing this as well. The JTC, the ECC, the National College for Education Leadership have all been doing this throughout this period. Sean mentioned identifying college graduates as tutors, perhaps in an online capacity, and I would like to put out there that we could be looking at our libraries and our librarians in that capacity as well. We continue at these additional slides that blended learning seems to be a way that this new normal will proceed, with 70% of countries planning to continue investing this blended technology and face-to-face. And most countries are focusing on vulnerable groups in their reopening, which we are too. You've seen in the press the focus on PATH students, the focus on children with special needs, accessing tablets, etc. Looking at this, you see the most common refrain is class size reduction, social distancing, hygiene measures, and transportation. I want to note that transportation is a part of the school day. So safety on the journeys to and from school will be critical for our children. Social distancing, class size reduction, mask wearing, 3 feet apart, all of that will be put in place. And the ministry has given schools, following best practices in other countries, some level of autonomy to decide how they want to work this within their school community. I read an article today in the Boston Globe that was actually saying that this hybrid system, depending on the childcare provision that parents are going to be able to provide for the days that online schooling will continue, might put children at greater risk. So this is going to require the workplace to continue to take into account more flexibility for our parents. Here are some slides from China where you can see the social distancing and the mask wearing and even plexiglass between children. Part of their reopening, and you know they reopened earlier than because they were hit first, includes mental health support, ongoing teacher training, and surveying parents. In China, when children go to school in the morning in many provinces, they take their temperature at home and they send that temperature to their teachers on an app. And then their temperatures are taken again when they reach the school grounds by a security guard. They eat their lunch at their own desks. They stay 3 feet apart and they wash hands regularly, and they take breaks for cleaners to come in and clean the school. Denmark is another country that is being watched by the world, see some outside classes taking place. This is something we will likely be doing. They've been reducing their number of hours. They've created bubbles or groups of students who attend school in certain times, staggering their drop-offs with different entrances and exits, etc., additional hand washing facilities, all of which we are doing. So these are the key steps that we want parents to remember and school leaders to pay attention to, that the safety of our children are paramount, protecting from infection, mental and psychosocial well-being, support for inclusivity, closing the digital divide, and the need for ongoing teacher training. It is a very different process to teach online than in person, and our teachers need to be able to be bolstered to do that and to provide creativity and access to additional materials in order to aid that work. So UNICEF is focusing its programming around helping the ministry globally and in Jamaica on building more resilient education systems and finding ways to reimagine our education system. Here's a quote that clarifies that. Now is the time that we can take bold steps to create inclusive, resilient, quality education systems. This is from the UN Secretary General. This will require, as Sean was saying, a refocus on skills that are going to be required as a result of COVID and as are required in the 21st century: digital, socio-emotional skills, and the awareness of climate change. We have been working with NCEL to create a virtual instructional leadership course. So we've already begun to do this. We've begun to use technology in multiple ways. We launched this course, which gives school leaders resources to create a virtual instructional leadership plan for their school community. 1,500 school leaders have already enrolled. NCEL has rolled out other courses called the 3R Framework, Child-Friendly Schools course, which is a child-centered Convention of the Rights of the Child enabled course that we supported. And we're working on a Safe Schools course, which will have new application in relation to COVID-19. So as we move to reopen schools stronger, we need to think of ways to be able to gather better data, and technology will certainly play a role in that. Improve digital scientific literacy, expand our connectivity, which Peter Bunting talked about, continue our training for students and teachers, and find ways to use technology for early detection. And my last point I want to share is an opportunity to work with an innovative tool that's a partnership between UNICEF and Microsoft. That is a learning platform that augments local content with internationally vetted and approved material, that it is locally relevant and culturally relevant, and provides a digital record of students' learning, and can also be made available offline, just as it is available online. It's inclusive and accessible, and it's teacher and learner centered. So to close, we know education is a fundamental human right. It's an enabling right. It's a global common good, and it's a primary driver of the SDGs. We have an opportunity to reimagine education. We can take this leap towards forward-looking systems that deliver quality education if we work together in partnership, and if we do the best that we can to close the digital divide and maximize the opportunity it presents us with. Closing, I'm showing you some beautiful images from a global campaign that was launched last month by UNICEF in partnership with the Marley Foundation. As you can see, One Love is the theme, and this is a way of virtual fundraising and spreading messages of love and hope, which are needed more perhaps than ever before. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Torteo. One love to you as well. She definitely brought the hope and she brought the energy, but she also brought some really important information. As much as we are concerned about, getting our children back to school and their safe return, what she was able to do was actually show us the stats and to give us examples of schools within our area, our region, that have already started to do it. So it is that not all hope is lost, but what she's saying is that there are different alternatives. And what she spoke about, the summer slide, is actually something very true. Most children just kind of have fun during the summer. No one's reading, no one's checking in on everything. Most of us are on our video games, and as parents, we understand what that regression looks like. And so really what they're pushing for is to get our children back socializing, getting them active, also getting them in the classrooms. But of course, after all, best practices that have been shared have been actually done in the schools and the classrooms. So again, thank you so very much. She mentioned transportation being very important, and I suppose that there will be a question and maybe an answer with regards to transportation later on. Thank you so very much for that very powerful presentation, giving us hope, restoring hope, and showing us that it can in fact be done, and that education is a fundamental right of our children, and we need to get them back in schools and educated. So we've heard from two of our presenters, and now we are going to ask you to just keep your attention to the screen as we look at a video presentation about school leadership in preparation for the safe return to school. Enjoy.
The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information continues to manage the Jamaican education landscape as the nation battles the COVID-19 pandemic. We have remained committed and focused on ensuring equitable educational access for all our children. An important part of our planning and implementation processes has been consulting with our educational partners. Let us hear from our leaders as plans are put in place to reopen schools on Monday, the 7th of September, 2020.
As part of the Ministry's comprehensive response to COVID-19, the Commission launched 36 helplines to ensure that we were responding to the needs of parents. Some parents are wondering whether or not we will have sufficient systems in place to ensure the safety protocols and precautions as outlined by the Ministry of Health will be adhered to. We have assured them that we have done everything that the Ministry of Health has recommended to ensure the safety of our children.
The Early Child Commission began preparing from as early as February. The team is working with our practitioners, working with our schools to ensure that hand wash stations are in place where possible. Sanitization stations are in place. Temperatures are being checked, and there's a temperature log ensuring that whatever happens did not happen in their space.
Where we have established home schools as we approach the reopening time for school in September, all our assistant registrars along with our inspectors will be visiting these schools in collaboration with our health and wellness team, just to make sure that all the fixtures are in place to protect our children and also our school administrators and teachers from this COVID-19.
There are schools and PTAs and alumni associations that came together along with other stakeholders, including the churches, that sought to assist our students by getting paperwork printed and delivered to them, and many were opting to use social media as a means of transmission of information of schoolwork through WhatsApp and other platforms like Google Classrooms, etc. Regardless of whether or not our PTAs are registered members of the association, we still do represent, and we lobby on government through the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and other stakeholder partners to see how best we can find the solutions that our parents seek.
The Ministry has sought to ensure that the recommendations of the Ministry of Health and Wellness are maintained in all schools. We have identified a number of operational modalities that will be implemented in schools to ensure physical distancing is maintained while sustaining the quality of the education product.
The National College for Educational Leadership has our school leaders COVID covered. We moved our face-to-face engagements into the online setting, making our products asynchronous in nature, where our principals could be accessing our programs at any time, any place, and anywhere. We were able to design the virtual instructional leadership course, designed to help our principals to manage in a remote setting. The college collated over 30 YouTube videos that dealt with leading in the fourth industrial revolution, managing remote teams, giving effective feedback in turbulent times, and leading in the time of a pandemic.
JTC assembled 32 master teachers and lead teachers who volunteered their services to prepare the teachers for the immediate changeover. In some areas, challenged by the absence of digital connections, JTC actually provided mobile internet modem. This service was greatly appreciated by our rural teachers.
The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information continues our partnership with all education stakeholders to ensure that our students and staff are safe and healthy as we reopen our schools amidst the pandemic. Let us continue to plan and implement safety measures for a safe back to school. And remember, here at the MOEYI, we care about you.
A beautiful message. Well done. In fact, it reminded me of what one of our presenters said, where I think she said the process will evolve over a period of time. We won't get everything right, but certainly what that video was able to show you is that they've been doing the work on the ground, making sure that they've been training the teachers and all relevant parties who are going to be in schools. And again, whether these are public schools or whether they are private schools, everyone was trained just in terms of all of the protocols that need to be observed. And that will continue to happen. So it wasn't just when the pandemic hit, but it has been going on during the summer. And of course, it will get just as rigorous as we get ready to return. That was very good. Congratulations to the ministry on making sure that that was done. So we heard from our first two presenters, and now we move into our next presenter. And again, we see the questions coming in. We're going to take the questions at the end. We see questions and comments, and we thank you so very much for them. So we will take the questions at the end. We move to our third presenter, Dr. Faryal Khan, Program Specialist for Education, UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean. And her topic is dealing with the COVID-19 crisis in education, the global perspective, policy implications for education during COVID-19 and beyond, so that you can get a little bit more information on Dr. Khan. She's the Program Specialist for Education at the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean in Kingston, which serves 20 small island developing states in the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. During this presentation, Dr. Khan will draw on UNESCO's consultations with Jamaica and present the implications for educational policy and present the implications for educational policy and strategic planning. Dr. Khan, we welcome you. I think you are on mute. I'm not too certain. Could you unmute yourself?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for inviting me to come on board this dialogue. I'm very happy to be here with you. If you'll allow me, I'll share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
Wonderful. So I would like to mention that UNESCO, along with the sister agencies of the United Nations, recently led the drafting of the Secretary General's policy brief on education in the times of COVID-19 and beyond. This was launched by Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the 4th of August. And Rebecca just mentioned this in her presentation. So thank you very much, Rebecca, because I can continue the dialogue based on what you just introduced to everyone. So my presentation is going to focus on our consultations with the Jamaican Ministry of Education, as well as some of the implications emerging from I'm trying to move it forward. Sorry. Yes, sorry, I had some difficulties. It was, before we begin, I would just like to frame the context. And in Jamaica, we have about learners that the number of learners affected by COVID-19 in Jamaica are about 627,000. These are estimations. Most of these learners are at the secondary level, followed by the primary, pre-primary, and tertiary levels. So when we talk about implementing our plans, we are going to see where do we need to focus our efforts. And we see that the secondary level is the hardest hit at this point. When we look at gender disaggregated data on learners, we see that in Jamaica, we have about 317,588 girls, females, who are affected, and about 309,568 male students and learners. So we have about 8,000 more girls who are affected by COVID-19. And in terms of teachers, because teachers are at the heart of our response for COVID-19, our estimates suggest that about 31,656 teachers are affected by COVID-19 in Jamaica, of which 9,384 are at the pre-primary level, 7,233 at primary. Most of them are at the secondary level, about 11,798, and there are about 3,241 teachers affected at the tertiary level. These are estimates that we tried to provide once we were, all affected by this pandemic. So preventing the learning crisis from becoming a generational catastrophe calls for urgent action from all of us. And, we all agree that education is not just a fundamental human right, it is an enabling right with direct impact on the realization of all other rights. So UNESCO has recently launched the Save Our Future initiative, along with with UNICEF and World Bank and other UN agencies and partners, and several policy options are being explored to mitigate the potentially devastating consequences of COVID-19 on the education systems. So from the global perspective, I thought it would be useful for us to look at what are some of the recommendations for policy and strategies. The first single most step to hasten the safe reopening of schools is to suppress the transmission of the virus and plan thoroughly for school reopening. This is going to be the most significant step, and to suppress the transmission of the virus at the local and national level. So this means working very closely, of course, with the health sectors, and some of the guiding parameters to reopen schools, of course, would be to ensure the safety and well-being of all learners, to plan for an inclusive reopening, including learners with disabilities, learners who may have diversity of needs, and listening to the voices of all concerns, of all concerned. And this links with what Mr. Peter Bunting was mentioning. We need to have all the stakeholders involved. We need to coordinate with the key actors, including the health community. The second recommendation for policy and strategies focuses on protecting education financing and coordinating for impact. The global recession will have lasting effects on the economies and public finances. Sean's Powers presentation showed us the impact of loss of learning on the economy. And so the national authorities and the international community, despite the constraints, will need to protect education financing through various avenues. Firstly, there is a need to strengthen domestic revenue mobilization for education. We need to preserve the share of expenditure for education as a top priority and address inefficiencies and leakages in educational spending. So we need more educational financial data, and we need to see what are the various sources of funding and where is the money being spent in a ways that we enable efficiency and effectiveness. We want to look at strengthening the international coordination to address the debt crisis and also protect the official development assistance, the ODA for education. So this has global as well as national implications for for protecting educational financing. The third recommendation for policies and strategies focuses on building resilient education systems for equitable and sustainable development. And again, Rebecca has she has articulately, shared in greater detail. The focus here is enabling the safe reopening of schools and better coping with the future crises. So UNESCO was, of course, able to work with the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information on the guidelines for the safe reopening of schools. And the focus is on equity and inclusion. The whole issue is, can we enable equal opportunities for all, especially for learners who may be at risk of dropping out and may not return to school? We want to minimize the losses, and we need to enable them to complete the primary and the secondary school cycles, and enabling learners with special needs who may have diversity of needs. So we need to address their needs at this point. This calls for reinforcing capacities for risk management at all levels of the education system, and ensuring strong leadership and coordination within the education system and at school level. We need to enhance the professional development of teachers for blended and distance learning modes. And here again is an area where we are working hand in hand with the permanent secretary, as well as with Dr. Kassan Troop, to put in place some training programs in Jamaica. And we, of course, want to ensure consultation and communication mechanisms, because through consultation, we vet our ideas, we look at what is feasible on the ground, and we enable ownership of the local communities as we move forward. The fourth recommendation for policies and strategies, again, has been addressed by my colleague Rebecca and Sean, is the reimagining of education and accelerating change in teaching and learning. We have seen that change is very much possible. The scale of the innovations made in a very short time to ensure learning continuity has proven that change can happen very quickly. And we have innovative ways to address the learning crisis. And in Jamaica, you are already exploring solutions that were perhaps previously considered impossible to implement, but you are doing it. So this has been an opportunity that the crisis has offered. And to do this, we have several points of entry. We want to focus on addressing learning losses, and this builds on the work that Sean has already mentioned, and preventing dropouts, particularly amongst the marginalized groups. We want to offer skills for employability programs through technical and vocational education and training, because we need to align with the labor market demands. The labor market landscape is changing very rapidly, and the education system needs to be really very clued into what is happening, what are the changes that are required, and offer learners the skills that they need for these programs for employability, but also entrepreneurship to enable opportunities for youth, and hope to plan for their futures, as Rebecca was mentioning. We need to support the teaching program, the profession, and the teacher's readiness to learn, to move into digitization and remote and distance learning. Because as you reopen, not all learners will be there at all times. So teachers will be teaching face to face in the schools, but they will also be teaching some learners remotely and giving exercises and work through distance learning. So this is going to be critical. And to expand the definition of the right to education to include connectivity. This is going to be the biggest lesson I think that we have learned from this crisis. We need to remove barriers to connectivity to enable equal opportunities for all. Otherwise, we exacerbate the learning divide if the kids don't have access to connectivity. So to do this, we also need to strengthen our data and monitoring of learning, and which includes, of course, learning losses, but also learning management systems, how are teachers going to assess, monitor learning through distance perhaps, and also for learners with special needs, where they may now be learning from a distance. How are we going to monitor learning and progress? So we need to have the learning management systems in place. And we need to strengthen the articulation of flexibility across levels and types of education and training. So as I wrap up, I would just like to mention that UNESCO's education response strategy in the Caribbean, and also which includes Jamaica, has been to assure continuity, quality, and equity of distance learning. We have modest funds. We are not a fund, a fund. We are a specialized agency, and our key pillars focus around strategic planning, monitoring and data analysis, mapping of immediate and long-term responses and strategies, online blended teacher training initiatives for the Caribbean, and also technical assistance to the Caribbean governments as and when required. And digital learning resources for teachers and parents, because through the International Task Force on Teachers, we have access to a lot of resources which we've been sharing also with the Ministry of Education in Jamaica. So our strategic implementation time frame is, of course, short-term, medium, and long-term. And in this, as we are working with Jamaica, we have been very fortunate to bring the Global Education Coalition, a partnership that was launched by UNESCO earlier at the advent of the health pandemic. We've been able to bring them to the Caribbean region, and we have enabled dialogue with Ministry of Education officials in Jamaica as well as other Caribbean countries. And the coalition has three main flagships focusing on connectivity, teachers, and gender equality. And our goal is to enable countries in mobilizing some resources and implementing innovative and context-appropriate solutions to provide education remotely, leveraging high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech approaches. And in this regard, on the 24th of August, we are launching the first training with the Blackboard Academy, and for all 20 countries in the Caribbean, and Jamaica is going to be part of that process. So specifically in Jamaica, UNESCO has been working with the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in three key areas, which has been preparing for back to school. We've worked on online blended teacher training, and on the 19th of August, we are launching the first training for online professional development opportunity for master trainers and teachers for digitization and remote learning. And this can then be scaled up within the different school districts. And within the framework of the Global Education Coalition, we are also working with the Blackboard Training Academy, and this is going to be launched in August. We are also sharing resources from the International Task Force on Teachers. They have valuable materials on providing guidelines to teachers to cope with COVID. And at the heart of all our work is, of course, the safety and the well-being of learners. And we are developing a video and posters to raise awareness on safety and well-being amongst learners. So the before the schools reopen on the 7th. And we are also ready to collaborate with the ministry on awareness forums to enable learners and youth to be prepared for returning to school safely and to become advocates and to become responsible citizens to enable the education systems to cope with the crisis. This is an opportunity for youth and learners to become very active citizens and take responsibility. It begins with the learner. So this is very important to give them the values, the skills, and the attitudes they need to make a difference to assure the safety and well-being of learners. And of course, we've been working on several webinars, 6 or 7 online capacity development webinars, which Jamaica has very actively participated in and contributed in the discussions, including the webinar on TVET, Technical and Vocational Education and Training. And we are also planning on a workshop in September. So I would like thank you very much, and I hope we can have an interactive question and answer session. I'm new in the region, so I'm learning as I go along, and it's really an honor and a pleasure for me to be with you today. Thank you for this opportunity.
Welcome. Thank you so very much, Dr. Khan. Welcome to the region. I think you have everything covered. You're doing very, very well. And I'm sure the next time we have our webinar, you'll be speaking in Patois. Thank you so very much for your contribution and, of course, for always being a very valuable partner in terms of UNESCO. You gave us some really amazing stats. Over 600,000 learners are affected, with the secondary students being at the top of that category. Over 300,000 males and females, respectively, affected, with 8,000 girls affected more than boys. And we saw over 30,000 teachers being affected. So we realize just the density of the situation. However, the areas that we really need to focus on suppress transmission of the virus, and that has to be done from home, in the workplace, as well as at schools. She spoke about finances, hoping that finances, expenditure, and resources will make education and educational resources top priority. She spoke about building resilient educational systems, which means that we need to empower our teachers as well as our youth teachers. And we also need to look at inclusion, reimagining education, and really looking at how we extend the right of education, which is connectivity. How do we ensure that we do not have any learning losses by ensuring that our parents and those students have their right to connection in order to learn? Thank you again, Dr. Khan. And now we move to our final presenter for this afternoon, Dr. Lauret Bristol, Program Manager, Human Resource Development, CARICOM Secretariat. Her topic is dealing with the COVID-19 crisis in education, the Caribbean perspective, issues in education planning in small island states. She's currently serving as the program manager, as we said, human resource development at the CARICOM Secretariat. And she has over 25 years experience in the education arena as a practicing primary school teacher, a teacher educator, and tertiary education administrator. During this presentation, Dr. Bristol will explore the issues in education planning in small island states and discuss their implications and opportunities for advancement amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Lauret Bristol, welcome.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and all protocol observed. I want to say a special thank you again for this opportunity to participate in this conversation as the world, and not just the individual state, is forced to become more agile in the equitable provision of sectoral services. This is a requirement for the education sector, which continues to carry the load of ensuring the security of economies and humanity at large. Thus, the COVID-19 pandemic is forcing education providers and education planners to give greater consideration to the constructs and conditions required for educational quality, mobility, and portability. This is no longer a challenge for the few, but it is now the reality of all. Borrowing from one of our colleagues in the region, Ambassador Blackman, he articulated that we face a peculiar set of challenges due to our small size and vulnerability to economic and environmental shocks and geographical remoteness. which also leads to limited productive capacities and a lack of economies of scale. And you know that for many of us in the region, as we address the COVID pandemic, for many of us, just in the corner of our eyes there and just looking over our shoulders, we are preparing for the challenge that will come with the hurricane season. We have seen the impact, we've seen the effects already with some of the storms that have passed through the region. So when we think about our small size, our smallness as Caribbean nations, recognizing high incidences in the region of NCDs and therefore high levels of comorbidity as it relates to conditions that would promote the challenges of COVID-19, also noting the loss of GDP due to critical drops in tourism, which is facing all of us, and Jamaica is well aware of that, and in the increased need to provide a social safety net for those who have fallen out of employment and for those who have lost their means of earning due to COVID-19, as well as recognizing the need to cover the costs for increased testing. This has all led for many of us for all of us in our region to increase levels of debt and greater public spending. But despite the challenges that were presented to us with COVID, we also have been recognizing tremendous opportunities for efficiency for educational delivery through technology. And I say this because we've seen this as evidence in not just the presentations of my colleagues who went before, but also shared in that video presentation that shares some of the best practices that Jamaica is currently involved in. So we know that we have over 20 million COVID cases confirmed globally. And we are noting a significant spike in the region as well, where we see now, as effective of 11th of August, there were over 14,000 confirmed cases in CARICOM member states. We know that we are operating in a state of uncertainty with a protracted impact on economies and social realities. We are all hoping for a vaccine or an effective treatment protocol, which is not likely, as the pundits are telling us, to occur this year. Thus, when we think about planning for and managing education in this context, we are required to respond to the immediacy of the situation. And we understand that one of the immediate response would be suppress the viral transmission within our community. And we also have to develop midterm and longer term responses, but critically, these responses must be continuously monitored and modified as needed. So immediately we recognize the importance of monitoring and evaluation as we design interventions to respond to the challenges presented to education delivery based on COVID-19. I won't spend too much time on the stats. Our colleagues have already shared much of this, and I've actually taken some of this from our colleagues' website, UNESCO, World Bank, UNICEF, and we see where just a snapshot of the region, and we can see where Jamaica is located as it relates to how this has affected us, etc. My slide, good. So when we think about what are the urgent requirements, the urgent requirements relate to the importance of designing appropriate responses to protect citizens' health. We recognize those responses are related to physical, social, and emotional well-being, and the need to reduce situations of danger, increasing the social safety net. We also need to maintain the right and access to education. Our colleagues have spoken about that, and therefore there's need for continuity of learning despite school closures, with increased and quickened adoption of ICTs, and Kapariel spoke to that. And it is said that for some of us, we have moved 10 years in 3 months in terms of the adoption and adaptation as it relates to technology in education. So therefore, we must ensure that information is communicated using means that caters to all, including the differently able. As we introduce interventions and we put in place systems of responses, we have to never forget our members of our marginalized community, our special educational learners. We have to think about how we package information to ensure that they too can make good decisions about their safety as we all live with COVID-19. And therefore, when we think about sharing that information to to cater for all, including the differently abled. We then need to think about as well, and has been discussed before, the need to develop guidelines for the safe transition to school. And this includes all of basic education, our special educational needs, and of course the TVET sector and higher education. So the CARICOM Secretariat, in collaboration with partners, UNESCO, IIEP, and the CDB, worked collaboratively with the regional network of planning officers. And these are senior planning officers and other key education stakeholders in the region who we convened over a period of 2 days to develop guidelines. And what is critical here in these regional guidelines that were circulated more than a week and a half to our member states via Saving Grant is that these guidelines were not developed in isolation. These guidelines were developed by our stakeholders in the region for the region. So the resulting guidelines that I'm going to speak to here is actually a collection of suggested actions to be considered to ensure the health and safety of our learners and our teachers while ensuring the continuation of education. And in particular, preparations that were needed in order to meet the challenges of the new school year. So the intention of the guidelines is that it helps provides some mapping or framework to help our stakeholders identify their strengths and gaps in responses, survey the existing structures and processes that are in place and that can be leveraged to fill the gaps, appreciating that we are confronting a significant economic squeeze. So we have to learn how to use the little that we have to do more, and therefore prioritize actions for the short and medium term. Another critical feature of the guidelines is that, and it was picked up by our other colleagues, is what we recognize that there were 3 key publics that the guidelines must speak to. At the policy level for our educational planners, when we think about what needs to be done across the gamut, and I will share with you across the themes that we are recommending, across the gamut of the response, not just pre, not just during, but also post-COVID, we recognize the need for recommendations and guidelines as well for those who are operating at the school level, the ways in which they will take policy documents and operationalize those policy documents. And we also recognize the need at the community level for our community stakeholders. So we recommended 7 broad themes, and you can see them there in front of you. And but I want to focus in on the human resource issue, because I think my colleagues have addressed some of the other issues as it relates to how we respond to school reopening and transitioning safely to school. That on the point of the human resource, it's about 2 key issues. One, and we have talked about that, is about critical training for our teachers and educational leaders, not just our teachers, and not just in pedagogy and curriculum adjustments or learning assessment gaps, but also in terms of the social and emotional intelligence. We have students and teachers who are going to be returning to school, and therefore they were going to be coming back to school with certain kinds of traumas that must be given consideration too, because this can affect learning going forward. And also another critical situation for us within the human resource reality for us in the Caribbean and the CARICOM member states is around statistical capacity. So my next slide will speak to a recommendation that we think about when we think about the statistical capacity. So the question for us in the region is, how do we mobilize resources and capacity in times of crisis to get data that we need to make more timely responses? And of course, when we think about multi-sectoral collaboration, we're not just thinking across these 3 sectors that I've identified here, and nor are we limited only to these 3 sectors, but we're thinking across public and private partnerships as well, where we leverage statistical capacity across and cluster towards a particular agenda to get the information that we need in order to create the responses that we need to develop in a timely manner. So the question in front of us then is, how are we using, for instance, for example, financial data to guide responses to design interventions for greater impact? And as it relates to training, again, because my colleagues spoke to the data management systems, we need to recognize and give some consideration to developing and encouraging strong informal mentoring clusters among teachers and educational leaders, and even within communities around parents, so that they can support each other in modeling professional collaborative networks that scale up our ability to address our human resource gaps that go on to challenge our ability to respond in a timely manner to the challenge of COVID-19. I want to end by saying COVID-19 has been a shock to many of our systems. It's continuing to ripple that shock through many of our education systems, but it's important to take up the notion of the hope. It's important to take up the notion of the opportunity and recognize that we are being given a fantastic opportunity to think about the ways in which we do education in the CARICOM region and continue to do education better, but more so do education in such a way that it strengthens and enables all citizens within our community. And with that, I say thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so very much, Dr. Bristol. Thank you for your contribution. Certainly, you brought up some very good points. The fact that we're small, looking at our size, looking at our geography, we are in fact vulnerable. And the very first thing that you said is that we have to be agile, we have to be flexible, we have to adapt, and we have to make sure that we secure our economies and our humanity. You spoke about us being or looking at mobility, quality, and portability. Thank you so very much. And I think something that I'll definitely take away, which was a very big part of your presentation, is that in all of this conversation about reopening schools and getting back to schools, we must consider our marginalized communities and those persons who are differently abled. And I thank you so very much for that inclusion, because most of the time when we think of the Caribbean communities, they're usually not always considered. So thank you so very much. So we had 4 different presenters, 4 international partners who have all helped our ministry in terms of recommendations from a policy standpoint, implementation, and sharing stats around the world, and of course making it granular to us as a very small nation. The questions I have, and I hope our presenters are still with us, is for Dr. Rebecca Torteo. No? Most of the parents who are in the deep rural areas are not that tech savvy or may not have a connection. How do we help our children to cope in virtual spaces, if possible, especially when students are on days off and teachers are, and how do we get those teachers to also engage those students? Any recommendations?
So the question is, how do we get parents in the rural areas who are not as tech savvy to be able to support their students who are learning at home?
Correct.
I think that the NPSC has set up, as you heard in the video, helplines that you can call and get information, and I would encourage parents to do that. Also, you heard Dr. Gordon talk about trying to expand connectivity. That's something that we don't expect the parents necessarily to do, but we're trying to build out that infrastructure network through partnerships. And I think that the children are pretty good on technology. Generally, they're better than we are. So it's more monitoring them and finding ways to support them. And I know the ECC has done terrific work using WhatsApp, creating parent groups using WhatsApp and guiding parents on a tool that parents do use very well. There are some games and activities that we have on our site. If you go to unicefjamaica.org, there's a COVID Diaries tab, I suppose, or a page. And we've been chronicling the great work that many teachers and parents and individuals have been doing. And we've also noted some sites that are helpful and some that are data free. The government has made some data free. So for example, I'm going to plug the library because I always plug the library. I love the library service. The library service with the ministry has put online on a data free platform a whole host of books that can be accessed, and they're accessible, meaning they're inclusive. So as you play the page and you see the images, the words light up and you hear the words. So for some of the stories, and that's at the jls.gov.org/bookstart-JA. So it's the Bookstart program, and they're books for babies straight on up through 9th or 10th grade. So that's an activity, and they have a lot of activities on their site. A lot of the government sites are data free and have activities. The museums also have activities for children, our museum sites, National Museum Jamaica, National Gallery Jamaica, etc. So government sites are moving to be more and more data free, which will give more and more of our families access.
Thank you so very much. More and more resources. Dr. Bristol, does CARICOM have any plans in place to provide sufficient support for students with special needs?
Right, thank you very much. So what CARICOM has been doing in terms of leveraging its connections with the member states, and particularly a key mechanism is the Regional Network of Planning Officers. And we have started in collaboration with our UNESCO partners, and we are going to continue doing some of that as well with CDB, to develop training and support to help member states, because obviously you can appreciate we do not have the resources to go into a particular member state and develop interventions, but certainly to increase the sensitivities around the importance of special educational needs. And you have to understand as well that CARICOM has appointed us a SEN rapporteur, and that's a Jamaican, I can't recall his name right now, but we do have the SEN rapporteur, and we have been working very closely with our stakeholders in special educational needs, and particularly when we develop these guidelines, they played a key role and function, because we recognize that the recommendations that you will have, for instance, for early childhood children or children in the primary school, it won't be the same recommendations for students who are dealing with special educational needs. One example that comes alive for all of us is understanding how does a child with hearing impairments operate in a classroom where they're required to wear masks, they're 6 feet apart, when a large part of their communication involves touching and drawing the attention of other people, and the expressions on the face counts for a lot. So what then are required for the accommodations in those kinds of realities? So we had to begin to think differently, critically, about how we make sense of the educational experience. So that's, CARICOM has been working very closely with our partners in the region around that and upping the scale of sensitization. So when we think about our responses at the level of operationalization in the classroom, we are actually not doing harm, but we are actually enhancing and in many cases advancing the ways in which we provide education.
All right, thank you so very much. Dr. Khan, what support will UNESCO provide to assist school-aged children and teachers in accessing internet and the connectivity that you spoke about earlier? You're on mute. On mute. We still can't hear you. Dr. Khan, can you hear? Try again.
That's a really important question you've asked, and I would like to be very upfront and direct. And while issues of connectivity are beyond the scope of our regular interventions with member states, because we have fairly modest budgets. At the same time, what we have done is through the Global Education Coalition, which is a consortium of education partners, including the private sector and including the civil society. We brought the Global Education Coalition to the Caribbean countries. And through the coalition, there are opportunities for Jamaica to speak and discuss with Microsoft, also to discuss with Blackboard Academy and Learning Equality, and Video Games Without Frontiers, as well as with some of these big organizations, to discuss how they could perhaps provide support to enable connectivities. So what we are doing in a very modest way is enabling capacity development for teacher training right now, which is within the scope of our mandate and our work. And but I think through the Global Education Partnership, we can translate some of the global advocacy efforts into concrete action on the ground. I do understand that while it's not going to be handing, because this is not our approach, we won't be handing out devices, but perhaps there could be opportunities for the Ministry of Education to sit with perhaps one of our partners to discuss what are the needs for connectivity for the education system. So that kind of knowledge and expertise and planning can be brought in to have a blueprint for technology and connectivity for the education system. And that kind of support is within the realm of our mandate and the collaborations we already have in place. And we've been very happy that Jamaica was part of some of these consultations that we've had with Microsoft and others. And the next step is going to be, of course, to sit down and see in a very feasible way. I don't want to raise expectations, but in a feasible way to translate some of that policy dialogue and global advocacy to concrete action on the ground by developing perhaps a blueprint for connectivity for the education system. That is very much possible. And also strengthening the capacity of teachers and professionals and education leaders to feel more comfortable with digitization and using distance and remote learning.
All right.
I hope it answers your question.
It absolutely does. Thank you so very much. Collaboration is key and making more partners is key. Finally, Mr. Sean Powers, we hear a lot of discussion around sustainable development goals, and we know that there are, I think, 16 or 14 or 16, but we always hear about them being spoken of. What are some of the challenges faced that may have resulted in the SDG number 4 being off track?
Thank you. That's a great question. And so SDG 4 has many subparts which pertain to different levels of education. And unlike the Millennium Development Goals, there's a much stronger emphasis on quality of education, that children really, it's as I think we've all emphasized in our presentations, there's an importance not only in having access to school and in completion, but also to ensure that children are learning the skills that we expect that they will acquire in education systems. So in many parts of the world, we still have some access issues, but I think, particularly in the Caribbean and in the Americas, it's primarily an issue of quality. And I mentioned when I was discussing the Human Capital Index, the difference between expected years of schooling and learning adjusted years of schooling. In terms of human capital formation in the region, that's actually the biggest barrier. It's bigger than access to education. It's bigger than health barriers at this point. So I think the biggest challenge is sort of closing that quality gap. And I think, as different presenters have said, the role of teachers is absolutely critical. And we really need to revolutionize the teaching profession to make sure that we're recruiting the best people to be teachers. We're giving them the support and the motivation that they need to succeed. We're giving them the right training, practical hands-on training. We're giving them support through classroom observation and follow-up coaching. And we create a career path for teachers so it becomes a lucrative and prestigious career. All of those things I think are works in progress, but will be really critical if we're going to achieve the SDGs. And I think it carries across all levels of education, from early childhood all the way up to secondary and beyond.
All right. Thank you so very much. I definitely appreciate that. We're looking at quality as well as equity. Now we are going to have Jamaica's response. I know a lot of parents are there on the platforms. You have your questions, you have your concerns. Now that you've listened to the presenters, you're asking yourself, all right, so what is Jamaica's response? Well, the wait is over. The Honorable Carl Samuda, Minister of Education in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, is here. Welcome, sir. All right, so while we wait for the minister to get on, I know he was here earlier. He's been watching the entire thing. He's been here virtually. What we'll do is we'll go to our video presentation where we see, I believe, teachers and maybe, I think it's students and teachers are laying fares and providing options for teaching and learning. Have a watch.
Right across the island, our parents are apprehensive in just sending their children to the public education system or even the independent schools.
There are persons who are opting for the homeschooling or the online solutions, and they would be applying to the Ministry of Education.
We have had a series of meetings with parents that have gone very well. This was supported by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, and also the National Parent Teachers Association of Jamaica. The feedback has been good. Many parents are asking questions about homeschooling because that's also an option for schooling for September. Some parents are wondering whether or not we will have sufficient systems in place to ensure the safety protocols and precautions as outlined by the Ministry of Health will be adhered to. We have assured them that we have done everything that the Ministry of Health has recommended to ensure the safety of our children.
The homeschooling is a very good alternative. And so we have seen an increase in the number of parents who have expressed interest in having their children homeschooled. It is really the responsibility of the Ministry of Education to ensure that the children in our homeschooling setting, that they are monitored. That also is the responsibility of the independent schools unit. And so our assistant registrars and our inspectors, they visit these homes where we have established homeschools just to ensure that our children are exposed to education of the finest quality in an environment that is deemed to be safe.
We recently did an inclusion training with Prof. Samson, funded by UNICEF, to ensure that we are also reaching our children with special needs. So we're ensuring that all our children are getting what they need. We are about to have dialogue with Independent Schools Unit because parents have come forward to say that they're worried about taking their children back into schools, back into the learning spaces. Parents would have asked, can I homeschool my children? What we want to ensure is that the parents have what they need from the curriculum, and also we're able to track through registration where these children are.
Parents with children age ranging 6 through to 18 years, once you're interested in homeschooling, you can send us an email at isu@moey.gov.jm. Please be confident that in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, we are working assiduously. We are strategizing to ensure that all our stakeholders are in a safe environment for the reopening of school for academic year 2020-2021.
All right, thank you. That was an absolutely beautiful presentation. Now, you guys know whenever it comes to connectivity, we've spoken about digital. And for those of us who've been in webinars before, Murphy always has a way of showing up. Therefore, we were not able to reconnect with the minister. However, we do have a very capable person to stand in his stead, and this is Dr. Kassan Troop, Acting Chief Education Officer, who will deliver Jamaica's response in regards to return or going back to school, the reopening of schools amidst this COVID-19 crisis. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Jamaica. Good afternoon to my permanent secretary. We had a difficulty reconnecting with our minister, but as you know, we continue to provide the updates. So we had to move quickly into emergency remote teaching as the entire world had to deal with the unprecedented changes of COVID-19. And Jamaica was challenged, but we had to pull our resolve, our creativity, to make sure that teaching and learning was uninterrupted. So we did many things. We had to collaborate and consult. It was a new normal for us, and so we had to make sure that all our stakeholders would have been called into the picture so they can be adequately prepared for the new normal. So yes, we continued teaching and learning. Many other countries in the region could not have done so. There was a pause, but Jamaica did not pause because we value education and we understand the decline that can happen when things are interrupted. So we continued and we shifted into what we called emergency remote teaching. And that included a blended and mixed modality of learning approaches for our institutions. So though we had a closure of the physical schools, schools shifted into remote experiences, including online, virtual learning, including the use of learning kits, right? That includes printed materials, worksheets, and as you know, workbooks. We actually asked our principals to allow our students to take the books home so they could continue their teaching and learning experiences. We actually also partnered with our television providers and our cable providers to deliver what we call televised learning and radio education. So those students who were not able to get online, they were able to continue education through the televised program the radio program, usage of the learning kits, and of course, we know now what happened with our WhatsApp on our Zoom platforms. So many of our principals and our teachers started to learn how to manipulate the learning platforms such as Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, and WhatsApp became the popular mode of communication with our teachers and parents and children. What we saw coming out also was some creativity on the ground. I think some of our partners spoke to the community blackboard idea, or principals transporting printed materials on bike and bicycle. And that demonstrated some passion and love for our children. So we have some educators out there who were just unafraid. They really wanted to make sure that their students were connected. In our consultations, our principals asked us quickly, can we be permitted to give our tablets? So we have had approximately 18,000 tablets at our schools. And many of our principals sought permission from the ministry to give these students who are in remote areas that could not connect these tablets to use while they were in a remote location. The Ministry of Education reimagined and recalibrated quickly to make sure that the platforms were there and available for our principals to give these and to account. So we developed our protocols and we shared that with our principals. And quickly those students who were not connected, especially those who were preparing for their exams, they were given tablets to support the teaching and learning engagements. The Ministry of Education also listened to our principals. So as we prepared for those students who were going to sit the exit exams at the high school level, a lot of persons were nervous, uncertain as to what to do. Can we really do this? So we consulted and our principal said to us, trust us. We have this covered. Just support us and we can make sure that our students sit their exams. So the Ministry of Education supported our high school principals in delivering what we call a remedial program, just to make sure that the students were adequately prepared for their exams. And we opened the walls of our high schools, again, in a creative way to welcome our students. And of course, before we did that, we had to partner with the Ministry of Health to train our school staff to prepare the environment to treat with the infection prevention control measures. So we got them sanitization materials, the parents and the principals worked together to install wash stations, to make sure that the temperature check facilities were in place, and all our high school students were exposed to these protocols as they move in and out of the physical space in preparation for their exams. I can tell you today that we had a successful remedial program, and our students did their exams, and the exam timetable ended on August 4th. And some other exams are still going on now, our NCT VET exams and our City and Guilds exams and so forth. So we were able to manage that. Now we are really proud of our principals and teachers at the secondary level, because that is almost like a stress test to see, can this really work? And I know my parents know in cyberspace, you're listening and you're nervous, you're seeing the uptick in the virus coming up at this period and you're wondering, can we really do this? We can't say definitively that everything that we have planned will work. But what I can tell you, we are collaborating, we are communicating, we are reimagining, we are redesigning, and we are changing as we go along. There's no static approach in treating it back to school. We have to be flexible, we have to be agile, we have to listen, we have to do research, and all of that is taking place to make sure that school can take place come September. And I know many of you are concerned about, can we really go back? So yes, we have done our assessment, and as we know now, based on the number of students enrolled in our schools, based on the physical facility, and based on the social distancing protocols, we now know that approximately 570 of our schools, to be exact, 569 of our schools can operate in their normal environment, going with a whole school approach to teaching and learning and not compromising safety. So we are not taking the decision just to have students in, but the decision is informed by the protocols, informed by space and enrollment. And our principals have been doing the clinical planning We have schools that will operate on a rotational approach, which means that some students will be engaged from a remote location while others are going to be in the physical classroom. And then there will be a flip of that. So there's a balance of the students getting the little touch of the teacher from a distance and the touch of the teacher in the live classroom. So the principals are planning those and they are organizing to make sure that it can operate efficiently. Now, what I want our parents to realize that there is no over-reliance on the internet. Because I know, I'm seeing the questions that are coming in and you're concerned, can this virtual school really work? The Ministry of Education has never communicated a virtual school. We have said we will have a mixed modality. There is no country, parents, at this time that can have an over-reliance on the internet. It will not work. We still have challenges locally with the build-out of the infrastructure, and so we have to plan with that in mind. So what have we done in recent times? The Ministry of Education would have partnered with some of our suppliers, and we have now moved into developing our content app. So the Ministry of Education actually has an application that will help in the mixed modality to have students who are going to be engaged remotely to be utilizing the computer while not being online. So that was something that happened and we learned from during the emergency remote period. We realized that a number of persons and applications relied on the internet. Now we have moved those applications under our content app, and those can now be utilized without being online. Our teachers will be utilizing these to plan and to delegate and to assign tasks to our students in the remote location. Also, when a child is scheduled to be working remotely, planning and collaboration and communication will have to guide that, because those children who are not able to access the internet will have to be prepared with their learning kits in the event that they do not have a device. Those students will also be guided by the televised program. So we will have a schedule that is being developed. The TV lessons will be designed and guided by the National Standards Curriculum, and those timetable lessons will be televised, and teachers will plan that in the remote location for students to watch the TV at a particular time. And then you, after that, will be assigned to some question and answers and some feedback via the WhatsApp or when you return to the physical space. So we have to be dynamic. We have to be ready for what this new normal will cause. We can't think about how schools operate normally. We have to think differently, and we have to be flexible. Our principals are fully seized on this. And so I'm asking our parents again, get in touch. You may be concerned, is my school going to be on the whole school? Is my school going to be rotating? Am I able to access homeschool support? All of this can be provided at our school level. Our principals have been trained. We have done the consultations. We have provided the guidelines from planning to implementation. So all the policy documents are out there. We have the education in emergency administration guidelines. We have the education in emergency reopening plan for schools. We have the administration in emergency, education in emergency curriculum implementation schedule and actual examples. We have actually developed our psychosocial plan to a point in which it is even granular, where an actual plan can be picked up from a school leader and a guidance counselor and utilize that for our students. You would have heard our international development partners talking about the psychosocial care for teachers, parents, and students. That is also a part of the readiness package and the implementation plans that we have on the ground. So parents, listeners, the Ministry of Education, we are listening, we are consulting, we are partnering, and we are building the capacity, the capabilities of our teachers to deliver. I can proudly report that we have in excess of 20,000 teachers who are trained in virtual pedagogy to navigate this new normal. And so the students are not going back into unfamiliar territory. Our stakeholders are ready. We are taking care of our teachers. We have done a series of empowerment sessions for our teachers to express our appreciation for what they have done and to inspire them to continue to give back to Jamaica, land we love. So we are looking at a multifaceted approach. Not perfect, We are learning, we are listening, we are getting it right, but we are not giving up. That is most important. We are committed to the plan of quality and equity in the education system, and we will maintain a listening ear as we try to get it right. So those are the updates, Terry, at this point.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Troop. I don't know, I mean, election is in the air. We have a nomination date, we have a general election date, and boy, I'd vote for you. Wherever you go, I'd just vote. Let me just, I mean, may I say it? I mean, I think everyone, including the media who is here, everybody's going, yeah, no, but thank you. Because I think it is very important for a lot of our parents to understand what it is you guys have done. There's a lot of mixed messaging going on in the space, and so it's very good to hear from the horse's mouth what has been done and what will continue to be done. So we do have some questions that you know, parents are asking, and we're going to have some. I know that we are very limited on time, therefore we'll try to get rid of as many questions as possible. We take the opportunity to apologize to our viewers who apparently had a bad user experience on Instagram and YouTube. Everything is perfectly fine on Facebook, and we have recorded this session so that you'll be able to go back on all of the ministry's social media platforms when it is uploaded. So again, we do apologize, but we thank those of you for sticking and staying with us on Facebook and for giving us the questions. I know that we've been answering some as we've gone along. So one of the questions is masks. Everyone has spoken about masks being mandatory. The question is, will masks be required as a protocol for everyone, from students who are early childhood all the way to those who are in tertiary institutions?
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
Our babies, 0 to 2, they are not expected to wear the mask.
Okay.
So we are supposed to be practicing the physical distancing as much as possible and reducing the number of individuals who interact with our babies.
Okay.
So it's the same persons all the time dealing with our babies, and they are practicing the infection prevention control measures, the washing of the hands, the sanitizing, the physical distancing, the sanitizing of the materials that they are using. So those over 2 now are expected, according to the Ministry of Health protocol, to wear their mask. All our students are expected to wear their masks. All our teachers, all adults in the learning environment. Colleagues, parents, teachers, as you are listening, the Disaster Risk Management Act would have instructed that all of us in Jamaica should wear our masks. Once we are interacting in a public space, we should wear a mask. It's a standard procedure, and as we prepare for school, that should be a part of the preparation. So yes, masks are expected for our children and adults in the learning environment. Our babies 0 to 2 are exempted at this point in time, but other measures are put in place to keep them safe.
And for those students who may not be able to have masks or cannot afford masks, will they be provided?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Our principals have been guided already. We have provided additional resources to treat with sanitization in our schools, and they know that they can procure additional resources to treat with emergencies. So we know that there will be some students and some teachers who may have emergency. You come to work and your mask probably fell, right? It loose, right? So our teachers and principals will prepare to support our teachers and our students in the learning environment to make sure that everybody is safe. I can only say it again. We will not compromise on safety. Whatever it takes to keep everyone safe, we will provide the enablements for that.
All right, thank you. Someone asked, if the prevalence continues to rise, will the MOEYI stick with 3 feet between students, or is there a chance of returning to 6 feet?
Well, we are guided, Jamaicans, we are guided by the Ministry of Health and the World Health Organization protocols. So as we deal with the pandemic going forward, if there are changes in the directives from the government, from the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education will make those changes. And we will communicate that immediately as best as possible and most frequently as much as possible in all our social media spaces, our website, and how we communicate with our schools. So we are guided. We're in a health crisis, and it has impacted on the education system. So we are guided, and we'll make the necessary changes if we have to.
All right, a parent says, okay, how about when our children go out to play? So we understand that, we have we have them in their spaces in the classrooms. And we've seen in some countries like China where children are in these little plastic cages playing by themselves. I don't think we're there yet. So the question is, what about the children when they go to playtime?
Well, our protocols would have indicated, and as per the directive of the Ministry of Health, play is very important. For our babies, play is a part of the learning methodology, so we cannot remove play. What we do, we have to guide it. We have to reduce the number of students who are interacting with the materials and limit that. We have to sanitize the materials once we have to rotate it. So it again comes back to the protocol. Our students for PE, they are encouraged to move. Our students have been out of the learning environment for over 5 months. And so they have to keep moving. And so physical education is a part of the curriculum that we will not remove, even at this time. What we have said again is to observe the protocol. Have the students out in the open space, keeping your 3 to 6 feet distancing, reducing the number of students, sharing materials, work on the drills, independent drills, small group drills, rather than the large group. And of course, our PE and physical activities, those are guided by what we call a risk-based approach. Low risk, medium risk, high risk. And there are protocols that we have sent out to guide those level of activities at our school level.
All right, fantastic. I know I only have a couple more questions, and we just want to remind all our viewers who have definitely put your questions. They're all very good. Because we knew that we would not be able to answer all of them in this limited period of time, the ministry is going to ensure that all of those questions are addressed. Some are already being done so in real time, but we're going to address them, and they will be available on the ministry's website and various platforms. So we're going to do about how many more? Can you guys let me know? You guys? All right, no problem. So someone says, we heard about in transition and transportation being a big part of getting to school for a lot of students who take the bus. I used to take the bus in school. And so we know that you guys collaborate a lot with the Ministry of Health to be guided. How do we now approach transportation, which may not be your area, but for parents or, for parents who might be a little bit worried about that? How do we?
Yes. So we have two approaches with the transportation. Our Ministry of Education operates a rural school bus transportation program. And so under that framework, students and school administrators will collaborate to provide transportation service for those students on path who are benefiting from this framework. So that approach is going to be streamlined even more, and those transport providers will have to be trained by our school personnel to make sure that they are observing, again, the infection prevention and control measures, the physical distancing, the sanitizing, the opening of the windows. For example, Ministry of Health would have said, when you're in the public transportation, you are not encouraged to close those windows. You have to keep the air flowing. So that kind of a training will take place with those providers, and that's a specialized support that we have on the ground. And our principals also collaborate with neighboring schools. So those schools that have school buses, they're also brought into the conversation to see how we can share that resource, especially at this time. Also, we have been discussing, my permanent secretary and the larger ministry, we have been discussing with the Ministry of Transport to see how we can better streamline the service. Right. So the buses are available on time for our students to get to school, and also to make sure that there are no compromises in terms of how they enter or they exit, the physical distancing, the mask, the ventilation, all of that. And those are actually guided by the policies of the government. So it's not just a Ministry of Education framework. It is a national framework guiding transportation publicly. And the Ministry of Transport will also have persons who are vetting those and observing and guiding and making sure that the protocols are observed in the public space.
Right. Okay. So, and a question here is, and I know that I think it was Dr. Torteo who spoke about different resources that are no data, however, that do not require data, excuse me. Yes. But a parent asked, how advanced is the plan to facilitate the students of Jamaica, particularly at the primary school level, with tablets and internet for remote online learning? Connectivity is actually a very big question. There's also somebody who said if they have students who are not on path but are in need of tablets, what consideration, which is kind of the same vein.
Okay. So we are very advanced in terms of preparing to support our students with the devices, and we are focused predominantly on our path students, so that is true. So for this academic year, we will be providing in excess of 190,000 tablets that will be available in the system for this academic year. You would have been familiar with the 40,000 tablets that are being procured by e-learning, and we actually have those in hand, and we are uploading the content. I just said earlier that we have procured our own Ministry of Education content app. And so our students will know that will be uploaded to our tablets and distributed to our students in September, the first week or so in September. The students will get these. And before that, Terry, we had the students using them only at school. Under this situation, the tablets will be assigned for the entire year to the student, and they will be able to use that from a distance or even at the physical interface. So we'll focus, yes, on our PATH students first. Also, the distribution model is guided by those students who are sitting the exams. You know, the PEP persons are very excited and careful about what goes into preparing those students. So our grades 4 to 6 students will be served first, right? And of course, we have a bigger plan to support our secondary schools with ICT support, where the students on the path from grades 10 to 13, we are moving expeditiously to procuring laptops for those students on path at the grades 10 to 13 level. We're actually going to be having a consultation tomorrow, Madam PS, with our high school principals to provide some guidelines as to how that will work. So we are advanced in the planning. It will take some time for us to roll out the entire 192,000 that we have in place. We know that over 18,000 tablets are already in the school system, right? Already distributed, and our principals have been guided to make these available to our students from we entered into the pandemic. And for those who were not given, those tablets will also be now given to those students if it weren't given before. So that is out there, and we continue to provide and beef that up.
Thank you. No, I mean, very good presentation for some of the parents, which is I'm just going to slip in one. For those of us who might be parents for private schools, I know that Dr. Tortilla, I think another presenter had spoken and said that, you know, guidelines are given to schools, and there's some schools that have, you know, autonomy to see what works and what fits.
Yes.
For the parents in the group, because I did see some parents from private schools asking, you know, because a lot of the conversation is skewed towards the government schools. So they want to know, for example, for those in the private schools that tend to be very independent, you know, what plans are there to ensure that even though they are in fact independent, they are still operating in compliance with what the ministry
I just want to assure our parents and listeners that our private schools, they do work with us. As a matter of fact, they benefit from all the guidelines that we have sent out. All those documents that I spoke to earlier, they are also in receipt of that. And they are working with the Ministry of Education. All our private schools are included in our quality education circles, and they benefit from the same supervision that our regular public schools benefit from, either through our registrars and assistant registrars in the independent schools unit, or the education officers who are resident in the region, as well as the curriculum support officers as well. So they'll benefit from our support. They will be guided. What is most important, parents, is that they will not compromise. So they may be able to work differently from the guidelines we have provided, but they will not and should not compromise the safety and well-being. So they cannot operate at 2 feet or a regular classroom size. No, there are health protocols in place, and they will have to observe those. So that is what we are providing for them. They work along with our guidelines, and we really do not see any major departure from that. They actually call us to make sure that there's clarity from time to time. They may not stick slavishly to the dates that we have provided, but the operational guidelines, they are also using those as well. And we have those that we have our MOU with. We monitor them closely. We have about 38 schools out there that we have a special MOU with where we place students. Those schools are monitored, and those schools are supported through the government's resources.
All right. Thank you so very much, Dr. Chu, for stepping in, the acting chief education officer. vote for her. I'm just joking. She's not on a ballot or anything. She's not on a ballot or anything, but it is fantastic to see how impassioned you are. You spoke about connection, collaboration, consultation, reimagination, recalibration, and redesigning. So again, as parents, we know that some things may not all work out in the first week or the second week, but it is the process, and it will continue to change as the ministry continues to learn. Again, for those of you who sent in your questions, we just want to let you know we're taking stock of all the questions that you have sent. Some were answered in real time on Facebook. We do again apologize to those of you who are on Instagram and on YouTube, and we will ensure that not only will the recording be out, but answers to all of those questions will also be available on the ministry's social media pages as well as website. So the lady who has the opportunity to move the vote of thanks is Mrs. Vivienne Johnson, Senior Director, Planning and Development Division out of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To colleagues, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Dr. Terry Carroll Reid, the Honorable Carl Samuda, Minister of Education, Youth and Information, Honorable Orlando Terrelong, Minister of State in the ministry, Mr. Peter Bunting, Opposition Spokesman on Education, Dr. Cashson Troop, Chief Education Officer, I don't think I said Permanent Secretary, Dr. Grace McLean, our international partners, school leaders, teachers, parents and students, our esteemed guests, viewers, good afternoon. It really has been a challenging period for the global economy and especially Jamaican education system. But having heard us, all the presenters today, we are left with one feeling. We leave here with the feeling that all is not lost. We take away that there is hope. We have heard all of the presenters speaking about the various things that they have been doing and so forth, and therefore we know we will build back better. We will ensure that we do education in a better way to enable all. And so the task is mine to thank you all, and so our gratitude to Dr. Terry Carroll Reid, who graciously took us through, and we very informative, and you were very engaging.
Thank you.
To our Permanent Secretary, Dr. Grace McLean, for welcoming you all to the seminar. To the Opposition Spokesman on Education, Mr. Peter Bunting, he spoke of his experiences, the schools in his constituency. He highlighted the need for the good internet access, and he also emphasized the need to start school. And this is what we are here to know, to tell you about what it is that we have done. To our international partners, we just want to thank you all. You have shared with us, and you have been sharing with us right throughout the period and before, and we just want to tell you that we are very grateful. Mr. Powers, you really, the stats are there. We learned of all the possibility of the learning loss we were having before, and therefore we need to ensure that we support, we develop early warning system to prevent dropouts, to support parents, teachers, and students, and therefore we will ensure that we put all of those strategies in place to ensure that we try to contain as much as possible. Dr. Bristol, I just want to thank you for sharing the experiences with respect to small states. What happened as small state, we know of our challenges, the economics, all of these, and we just want to know that we are responding, thinking in terms of long-term, and as we design better systems in place. Dr. Tortello, thank you for confirming the hope, the need for us to be mindful of the COVID slide, and also that we note the protocols for the best practices, and we looked at the comparisons. We saw those schools that have reopened, and we are taking stock. Dr. Khan, with respect to all of those protocols, we appreciate the help of UNESCO. We appreciate all that you have just said. We just want to thank all of the others who have helped us in ensuring that we prepare for this, that this webinar is a possibility. We just want to thank the JIS for providing the platform, the cameras, all of the systems that let us have this to all of our listeners. We also want to thank the media service for helping us to prepare those videos. They have worked tirelessly. And last but not least, I want to give a big shout out, I want to say thanks to all of the committee members. They have worked very assiduously. They have worked long hours, but we are grateful. We have now come to the end of our seminar, and we know that we are better prepared. Thank you, Dr. Troop, also.
I was wondering how could you leave her out? But thank you so very much.
All.
Thank you,
Right.
Mrs. Johnson. Thank you for moving the vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. We understand that the climate is changing and there's a lot of things happening in the space, and we do prioritize our children. And you know, we do understand the fears. We do understand the concerns, which is why this webinar was extremely important, because it was important for you to get the credible information and not rely on information that you might hear in different spaces. So we thank the teachers, the administrators, the boards, all of those persons who, without them, we couldn't have even we couldn't have made it through the crisis. For all of the schools and all the teachers, the principals who were flexible and agile and were true leaders during the crisis, we thank you. To the parents, we know that this has been rough. Some of you have lost your jobs. Some are still furloughed. We understand your frustrations, but we appreciate your cooperation because this is a learning experience for everyone. Change is not always easy, but it is important. It is necessary in order for us to progress. So will we get everything right come first day of school? Maybe not. But if there's one thing that Dr. Troop said that I'm going to reiterate is that no matter what happens, the safety of our children as they return to school will not be compromised under any circumstance, and that is whether it is public or private school. So we will continue to learn. Our data analysts will continue to get the evidence that they need, and we will continue to reimagine and redesign as we go along. As we prepare, I wish you guys all the best. Please take note that the website is www.moe.gov.jm, and you can look out for all of the information and the recording of this webinar that is going to be upcoming in a couple of days or within a week. And for the teachers and parents, there will be an upcoming workshop, I understand, a training session to, again, just to galvanize and reinforce before the opening of the schools. I'm Dr. Terry Carell-Reid. It was a pleasure serving. And youth, 2 trainings and? Okay, and we have training programs for the youth as well. So we're trying to do a 360. So I'm Dr. Terry Carell-Reid, and again, it was a pleasure to serve you in capacity as moderator. Have a fantastic evening, and I wish you all the best.